Are you looking to be the male version of a basic white chick? Well, if so, you're in luck because we got the F-150 behind us, and today we're going to decide if it's a buy or if it's a bust. This is the 13th generation of the F-150 behind me right here. It's a 2016 and has 235,000 miles on it. We're going to go over some of the common problems. This is the Ecoboost, the 3.5 liter Ecoboost. We're going to talk more about that. Lots of topics there. And we are going to just look at some of the common problems, maintenance, the good and the bad of this F-150. We are fighting some wind here today as we take our tour around the outside, but these are aluminum all around, so you can ignore what I usually talk about with rust on the body. Now, the frame could still have some flakes. You should coat them, keep up with that if you're in an area where there is a lot of rust, but or salt use. But no, the bodies on these hold up extremely well. Corrosion isn't really a problem. Ford did a really good job. I prefer aluminum over some of the steel, even though it does have some downsides, but overall paint shines really nice. Everything on the outside of this guy looks really nice. And there's really just not a lot of wear and tear to talk about. And I think that Ford did a really nice job with the styling on these as well. Now, under the hood here, as I said, this is the Ecoboost engine. It's the 3.5 liter. Now, they have the 2.7, the 3.5, and the 5.0. This review is not about the 5.0, but a lot of the problems that the 3.5 has do cross over to the 2.7 because they're both sort of similar engines. Now, this has the 6-speed transmission instead of the 10-speed. The 10-speeds had not come out yet. And this setup makes 365 horsepower, 420 pound-feet of torque, which is very healthy for a little 3.5 liter V6. Obviously, there's turbos involved there as well. Ford was the first one to really adopt the small engine, put turbos on it, try to get the better fuel mileage, as is now basically mandated by the government. It's a whole thing. But the problem is when you do that, you add more pieces, you add more parts, you add more areas for failure. And that's across any manufacturer that goes this route, not just Ford. So let's start off talking about some of the common problems on this 3.5 liter. And the biggest thing I want to mention is that maintenance is key with these. They're a little bit fragile, I guess is the way I would say it. And oil changes are the biggest thing you're going to do to prevent or at least prolong the time until you have some of these problems. So we'll talk about the first thing that has already been done on this truck as a preventative maintenance measure, but it's also a common problem. And it's so common that they kind of just include it as a preventative maintenance thing, which I think is a little ridiculous. But timing chain. So timing chain setup has a tendency to fail on these, and it's generally between like 60 and 100,000 miles, which is not a lot of time for a major repair. Obviously, the oil plays a part in that, but it is a common thing. Next on the list, if you hear a sort of knocky, loud noise on startup, that is likely your cam phasers. Ford has not made a good cam phaser up until, from what I'm hearing, like 2021. But they've been using cam phasers for a long time. They've been a problem for a long time. And while it may not be a catastrophic engine failure, it does make a nasty noise on startup that's kind of annoying, so people choose to fix them. And then this is another one that, if you're familiar with the Ecoboost, you've heard turbo problems. Now, the turbo problems are an issue of just more parts on an engine. It's just not a simple engine. It's not a simple engine setup. And turbos have a tendency to fail across kind of any vehicle that has turbos because they spin so fast. If they don't have oil all the time, they will fail. Now, the problem with all three things that I've mentioned so far is they're not cheap to fix. The cheapest is probably the cam phasers, followed by timing chain, and then turbos are the most expensive. But none of them are inexpensive at all. Other things to note are sometimes there's some coolant leaks. I wouldn't call them overly common, but there is some coolant leaks sometimes, and they're usually not as expensive to fix. The other thing is oil leaks. Most of the time from the oil pan itself, Ford used a plastic oil pan and the gasket and stuff. It's not a great setup. As well as the valve covers could leak, but that is not as common as the oil pan gasket leak. Other things, the 6-speed transmission, I want to say is actually generally reliable, but it does have a tendency to have some hard shifts. Just like if you downshift, different things, it'll really clunk. Sometimes when you just put it into gear, it'll have some clunks. It's just a sort of clunky transmission at times. Otherwise, the 4-wheel drive, things like that, generally reliable. I don't have a whole lot to say about that. Moving on to the interior, I have the rear door open because the wind is so bad here today. Love the keypad. Ford is a genius for the keypads. I think every manufacturer should have implemented that, and they didn't. I actually heard that Ford is going away from it, which I think is a huge mistake, but that's sort of just me being nitpicky. Interior on this is actually worn pretty well, but I do want to make one big comment, and that is these are not factory leather seats. This was a base truck before, and someone added the leather seat cover, so that's not really relevant. The cloth seats, I will say, in these have a tendency to get stained like crazy. I've noticed the seat covers are almost in order. Otherwise, I have no issue with how the leather and things on other ones have worn, and the ones in this, even with the aftermarket seat covers, have worn pretty well. But foam feels good, all of that. Now, we do have a couple things to talk about here on the interior. I want to talk with number one, and that is frozen door locks. This was common actually pretty early on of your door locks freezing up. And Ford, when it was under warranty, would take care of it. But if your door locks are moving, it's not a huge thing. They can be lubed up kind of to help that out, but it is a common problem. Radios do have a tendency to go bad. That's one of the common electronic issues. The other thing is water leaks. Sunroof, windshield. They just had a problem with getting these things sealed up properly, especially the sunroof, which is with a lot of different vehicles, but that is a problem and will ruin some electronics and other things because of the moisture and corrosion that it causes. So like BCM and things could go bad because of that. So you want to get that fixed immediately. If you notice that there's a musty smell in one you're looking at or something, definitely check out that sunroof. Now, this being a base truck does not have the option, but the ones with the panoramic sunroof, those slides and things do have some problems as well, and they're fairly expensive to fix. So that's a big deal. I would recommend if you have one, probably just don't ever open it and just let that guy sit and rest. As far as interior quality, they're okay. The base trucks are very plasticky, very basic, but I think they design them nice. I think they look nice. They look fairly up to date, things like that. They do have a tendency to have some rattles and things like that, probably just sort of truck stuff. I wouldn't call it a huge issue, but they do have some squeaks and rattles around. But for a day-to-day use, I really do like these. I think they're one of the better interiors, especially in this generation of trucks between Ford, Dodge, and Chevy. They might actually be my favorite. And generally, as long as you correct the water problems, most of the electronics are fairly reliable inside. Now, Ford did a great job with space in these trucks. I mean, the legroom is just insane. This seat is where I would normally sit, and I have so much legroom, it's insane. I got plenty of headroom as well. The one thing I wish is this seat sat higher. I feel like you can see my legs, like I'm not very tall, I'm 5'8", and I feel like I gotta like put my legs out here to, sort of sit in a normal position. Otherwise, my knees are way up high. So this seat should have sat higher, I think. I think they could have done better with that. All right, we are pulling out in the F-150 for our road test. And I've driven these a lot, but every time I get in one, I am surprised by how roomy they are. It is just ridiculous. It feels like a mile between me and the passenger seat, and I think that's a really good thing. But yet the truck itself, I don't feel like really feels that big when you're driving or trying to whip into a parking spot. Now let's feel all of that 3.5 liter work. Transmission shifts were smooth but slow. Like, it took me a second. It had good power once it decided to downshift, but it was definitely a slow decision to make that choice. Like, if I was merging on the highway, I'd be a little bit frustrated right there, but the power is actually pretty decent. I don't want to harp on, any of the more of the Ecoboost problems because we've already covered that. The one thing under the hood that I did forget to mention though is throttle body issues are common, so we've got to replace that. Not a huge expense, but it is something to note. Otherwise, the suspension, everything like that feels good. I do know suspension-wise, the upper control arms tend to wear out pretty early, like 50, 60,000 miles on the factory ones. So that's something you want to look out for, especially if you notice a clunk in the front end. It's likely those upper control arms. Other things to me aware of is obviously they did this turbo setup so that they could save some fuel mileage. That's the whole goal of these small engines that are overly complicated and less reliable across the board, not just Ford, is that they are meant to save fuel. And honestly, I don't think that they really do. And at least not what I would think for the extra parts that you got to put into it, an extra repair cost. This gets like 17 and 23 on the highway for an average of around 20. That's good for a full-size pickup, but like, it needs to be better than that to me. So the 5.0 is not that much different, and it's more reliable. So spoiler alert. But the actual driving experience on these trucks is good. They drive really nice. I've heard some people complain about brake problems. I don't think it's overly common, but it is something I've heard of. This one's running just fine. The cornering characteristics, out on the highway, all that stuff, I have no issues with these trucks at all. They just run and drive very smooth, very nice. Yeah, other than that transmission thing, every once in a while, it's not a consistent thing. It's not like you're gonna have hard shifts all the time, but every once in a while, it'll just do a clunk or a hard downshift that just kind of takes you by surprise. Haven't felt that in this truck yet, but I'm sure it kind of would happen. Overall, just running around in the F-150 though, I like it. I really do. I like the interior space. I like the driving feel. Power is smooth and good. Yeah, I like the driving experience in these vehicles. Now that our road test is done, it is time for the rubber to meet the road and decide if the best-selling truck, best-selling vehicle in America is a buy or a bust. So these trucks are not cheap even now. They still run like $20,000 to $25,000, even with higher 150, 200,000 miles. They're still not inexpensive. I would love to give this truck a stamp of a buy, but the issue is maintenance is so important, and you're likely not going to know whether a truck was maintained properly. Obviously, somebody has records, but most people don't when you're buying a used truck. You just don't know. The problems seem to start cropping up most of the time around 100,000 miles. Somebody does a bunch of work, and then you get around 200,000 miles, and you're probably looking at a lot of the same problems again. There is people out there who have had these trucks, and they're 400,000 miles, all original turbo, timing chain, cam phasers, and that's awesome. So it's definitely possible. But I think we have to, because of these problems, declare the Ecoboost engines in the F-150 a bust. We might do a 5.0 someday, and that might be a different response, because that is a little bit more traditional, a little less complicated, unlike these guys. So unfortunately, the American home team loses. The best-selling truck didn't quite make the cut today. But I want to know your opinions. I'm sure this one is going to be controversial for a lot of people because of how many people love these trucks and have bought them. Thanks for watching, guys. Let me know your thoughts down below.
Yeah. Please tell me that I can't, that I won't, that I fail, that I'll never make it out, yeah. Please tell me all the bad, never good, fill my head full of every single doubt, yeah. Please say any negative thoughts, I pop off when I hear people say I cannot. I get off to the thought of proving everyone wrong, I won't stop to the top, so